Ever watched a movie the government literally tried to erase from existence, only to realize censors were terrified because it told uncomfortable truths? The 1980s in Britain were packed with Margaret Thatcher's moral crusades and video nasty hysteria, but hidden beneath the political panic were films so controversial they got prosecuted, censored, and buried. These weren't just restricted, they were hunted. Today, we're counting down 8 most controversial 1980s British sci-fi movies that got banned. The films that governments, censors, and moral guardians tried to destroy through heavy cuts, suppression, and persecution because they went too far, showed too much, or told truths nobody wanted to hear. Venom, 1981. Piers Haggard directed thriller about hostage situation with deadly black mamba snake loose in London townhouse. Klaus Kinski, Oliver Reed, and a 10-foot venomous snake in confined space. The BBFC cut the snake violence because they deemed it too intense and raised animal cruelty concerns despite no animals being harmed during production. The film straddled line between thriller and horror with science fiction elements in the exotic snake premise. The real danger on set wasn't the snake. It was Kinski's legendary, terrible behavior terrorizing cast and crew. But British censors focused on the snake attack sequences and demanded cuts before allowing theatrical release. The BBFC removed scenes showing the mamba striking and biting victims. The tension came from confined space with deadly predator, but censors felt the violence was too graphic, even though it was snake attacking humans. The cuts weakened the film's intensity and made the threat less believable. It became borderline ban situation where heavy censorship was alternative to complete prohibition. The uncut version eventually got released after censorship standards changed, but the damage was done. Venom is mostly forgotten now, partially due to the censorship battles that crippled its theatrical release. The film wasn't pure science fiction, but the exotic animal premise and heavy censorship make it relevant to understanding how British authorities controlled genre content in early 80s. Even nature-based threats were too much for censors protecting audiences from themselves. The Company of Wolves, 1984, Neil Jordan adapted Angela Carter's feminist fairy tales into dark fantasy horror about werewolves and sexuality. Red Riding Hood as gothic nightmare where transformation represents puberty and sexual awakening. The BBFC demanded extensive cuts before grudgingly allowing limited release because they couldn't handle Carter's subversive take on gender and power. The film weaves multiple stories about wolves, men, and the beasts inside both. The transformation scenes are graphic body horror created by practical effects. Skin tears, bones crack and reform. Faces elongate into snouts in painful detail. The sexuality is explicit and metaphorical simultaneously as teenage girl navigates world, where men literally become predatory wolves. The BBFC treated The Company of Wolves as exploitation instead of art film it actually was. The violence and sexual content combined with teenage protagonists made censors deeply uncomfortable. The werewolf transformations got trimmed. Sexual imagery was reduced. Scenes exploring female sexuality and male predation were cut. What reached British audiences was neutered version of Jordan's feminist vision. The full version eventually got restored decades later after standards relaxed. Modern audiences recognize it as horror classic, using genre to explore gender, sexuality, and power dynamics. But 1984, British censors saw danger in Carter's subversive fairy tales about female agency and male violence. Art film about sexual awakening and predatory masculinity was too threatening for Thatcher-era moral guardians who preferred traditional gender roles. The heavy censorship almost destroyed Masterpiece because it told uncomfortable truths about gender through gothic fantasy. Lifeforce, 1985. Tobe Hooper's space vampire epic from Cannon Films went too far for British censors. Matilda May nude for most of the runtime. Space vampires draining life force through sexual contact. bodies exploding into dust, zombie apocalypse hitting London. The BBFC demanded cuts because sexual content combined with graphic violence crossed too many lines simultaneously. The film follows astronauts who bring back alien vampires that drain life energy, turning victims into zombies. May's character walks through scenes completely naked, using sexuality as weapon. The life-draining process is explicitly sexual. Patrick Stewart appears in controversial scene kissing another man while possessed. Everything about Lifeforce was designed to be excessive. British censors required cuts for theatrical release. The sexual violence and prolonged nudity couldn't be shown uncut in 1985 Britain. Different versions existed for different countries as international censors all had problems with various elements. The BBFC cutscenes showing the sexual nature of the vampirism and reduced graphic violence during the London apocalypse sequences. The censorship wasn't complete ban, but the heavy cuts crippled the film's coherence. Hooper's vision of operatic science fiction horror got neutered by moral guardians uncomfortable with sexuality and violence combined. The full uncut version eventually became available on home video after years, but theatrical audiences saw a compromised version. Lifeforce demonstrated that even big-budget studio films faced censorship in Thatcher's Britain. The sexual content was the real problem. Violence alone might have passed, but sexuality plus violence was unacceptable to 1985 British standards. Possession, 1981. Andrzej Żuławski's psychological horror starring Isabelle Adjani won Best Actress at Cannes. Then British censors looked at it and butchered it. 42 minutes were cut before allowing UK theatrical release. The original version was effectively banned through mutilation. What remained barely made narrative sense. The full uncut version wouldn't be legally available in Britain for decades. The film depicts marriage disintegrating into madness. Adjani's character has an affair with tentacled creature living in an apartment. Her breakdown is visceral body horror. The subway miscarriage scene is one of cinema's most disturbing performances. Adjani convulsing and screaming as something births from her. The creature sex is explicit body horror showing interspecies violation. Żuławski made art film about psychological collapse through horror imagery that refused to look away. The BBFC was horrified and demanded massive cuts. The creature had to go. The sexuality had to go. The violence had to be reduced. The intensity of Adjani's performance showing complete mental breakdown was trimmed to make it less disturbing. 42 minutes vanished from UK theatrical print. British audiences saw incomprehensible fragment where character motivations made no sense and the horror was defanged. Possession was banned outright in several countries. The full version circulated through bootlegs and imports. Critics who saw uncut version at festivals recognized it as masterpiece. British audiences got censored wreckage. The complete version finally got proper UK release in the 2000s after censorship standards evolved. It's now recognized as one of the great psychological horror films. But 1981. Britain couldn't handle Żuławski's vision of madness, sexuality, and tentacled body horror. The heavy censorship was effective ban disguised as classification. Extro, 1982. British alien horror that went so far it became one of the most prosecuted video nasties. The birth scene alone guaranteed censorship battles for years. A man impregnates woman at roadside. She gives violent birth to full-grown man covered in slime who kills her immediately. Then the film gets weirder and more disturbing. The returned father has alien powers. Toy clown comes alive and suffocates a woman with plastic bag. Action figure soldiers animate and murder the father with tiny weapons. The child develops alien abilities. Sexual undertones run throughout with uncomfortable implications. The violence is graphic and bizarre. Everything about Extro was designed to disturb. The film was prosecuted under Obscene Publications Act as video nasty. Video stores selling it faced legal action. Police raided shops and seized copies. Extro was on the official banned list, then successfully appealed and removed, then added back during renewed moral panic. It bounced on and off the banned list throughout the 80s depending on political pressure and which moral crusader was testifying before Parliament. The censorship made Extro legendary. The controversy turned it into cult classic through underground bootleg trading. The birth scene and toy murders became infamous among fans seeking most extreme content censors tried to suppress. Some countries kept it banned for decades. The British persecution was political scapegoating using horror to distract from actual social problems. Extro was weird and extreme, but the prosecution was moral panic weaponizing obscenity law against genre cinema. The censorship gave it immortality. The Evil Dead, 1981. Sam Raimi's low-budget horror wasn't even British, but became the most famous victim of Britain's video nasty persecution. Video store owners were prosecuted for selling it. Police raided shops. Copies were seized and destroyed. The Evil Dead became symbol of everything Thatcher's government claimed was corrupting youth despite being American indie horror comedy. 5 teenagers unleash demonic forces in a cabin. The violence escalates cartoonishly. The tree rape scene caused particular outrage. Limbs get severed, bodies possessed, blood sprays in deliberately over-the-top excess. Raimi made horror comedy, but authorities treated it as genuine threat to civilization. The moral panic was absurd, but consequences were very real for people selling it. The film was refused classification in 1982, effectively banning legal sale in UK. Video stores stocking it faced prosecution under Obscene Publications Act. Shop owners went to court defending their right to sell zombie movie. Some were convicted and fined. The persecution lasted through most of the 80s as authorities used horror films as political scapegoats. The Evil Dead finally passed uncut in 2001, 20 years after release. Bruce Campbell's Ash became cult icon despite the ban. The censorship made it more famous than wide release ever could. It proved British 80s censorship was political theater using genre films to appear tough on crime and morality, while ignoring actual social issues. The ban was unjust and ultimately futile. You can't ban cult classics. You just make them legendary and create black market that enriches bootleggers instead of legitimate distributors. Threads, 1984. The BBC made docudrama about nuclear war destroying Britain. It was so realistic, so unflinchingly honest about nuclear holocaust consequences, that it was never officially banned, but effectively suppressed for decades through government pressure and institutional fear. Authorities didn't want citizens seeing what would actually happen if Cold War went hot. Threads showed nuclear attack on Sheffield in documentary style. The bombs drop, millions die instantly in the flash. Survivors face radiation sickness, societal collapse, starvation, and slow death. Society doesn't recover, it regresses into barbarism. Children are born severely deformed and brain damaged. Language skills deteriorate. Farming becomes medieval. Government executes looters and leaves bodies hanging as warnings. The film ends on a scream with no hope, no resolution, just unending horror. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were forced to watch it. The film reportedly influenced nuclear policy discussions because politicians finally saw a realistic depiction of what their weapons would actually do to civilians. But the BBC refused to rebroadcast it during prime time for years. It aired once in 1984, traumatized the nation, then disappeared from schedules. Teachers showed it in schools to terrify students about nuclear war. An entire generation has nightmares about it. Threads wasn't banned through official channels because that would acknowledge what it depicted was accurate. Instead, it was suppressed through neglect and pressure to bury something too honest about nuclear reality. The film was too depressing, too realistic, too effective at showing the apocalypse for authorities who wanted citizens believing in winnable nuclear war. The unofficial censorship through minimal rebroadcast was more effective than outright ban. Out of sight, out of mind. But everyone who saw it carries those images forever. The suppression was admission that everything shown was true. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain, 1981. Romano Scavolini's ultra-violent slasher was prosecuted as obscene and became one of the most aggressively banned video nasties in Britain. The film wasn't British, but UK authorities made it the centerpiece of their moral crusade. The distributor was actually sent to prison, the only video nasty prosecution that resulted in jail time for distribution. A psychiatric patient released from institution begins murdering people while experiencing horrific flashbacks to childhood trauma. The violence is extremely graphic. An axe murder sequence is prolonged and brutal. A decapitation is shown in explicit detail. The childhood trauma scenes involving child witnessing violent sex are deeply disturbing. Everything about the film was designed to provoke and disgust. But the real controversy was the advertising campaign. The distributors claimed the film was based on real events and used sensationalistic promotion about consulting actual psychopaths. This brought police attention immediately. When authorities watched the film, they prosecuted under Obscene Publications Act. The case went to trial, and the distributor was convicted and imprisoned. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain remained banned in Britain for decades. It became legendary as the video nasty that actually sent someone to prison. The censorship was extreme, and the prosecution was meant to send message to video industry. The film itself is exploitation trash, but the imprisonment of the distributor for selling a horror movie was governmental overreach using obscenity law as weapon. Which censorship shocked you most? Which film deserved to be seen instead of suppressed? Which ban was the most unjust example of government controlling what citizens could watch? Drop your answer in the comments below. Hit subscribe for more censorship history and banned cinema. And smash that like button if you believe adults should decide for themselves what films to